Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Martin, and on behalf of the WAM SCOTA, or Solidarity Committee on the Americas Committee, we welcome and thank you all for coming. Whether you are in this actual room or on Zoom or Facebook, this is the first in-person WAM SCOTA coffee hour in a while, and you know exactly what that while is, over 2 years. Back here at 4200, let's good to be back. Thanks especially to our incredible techie Carla, who is making the online part of this possible, and of course to our speakers, Cassia Lehman, I always get it wrong, Cassia Lamb, and Tom Burke, who will tell us about Alex Saab and the campaign to free him. Carla has turned off your videos and mics, but please put your questions and comments in the chat or on Facebook. The event will also be put up on the WAM YouTube channel in a couple of days. I'm sure you, after you hear what Tom and Cassia have to say and are enraged with what's happened to Alex Saab, you want to share it widely, and it's important to do that. Just a couple of things we have for those in the room. We have olive oil, good Palestinian olive oil at the back, which is $15 a bottle. Sorry, those online can't do that, but make your checks out to WAM or cash is good. But before, what we always do before our events is do a land acknowledgement to remember that we're on stolen indigenous land, and this is the WAM land acknowledgement. Badoti is a Dakota word that generally means where two waters come together. The Badoti were Hahatanka, river of the waterfall, or Wakpatanka, the big river, called the Mississippi River in English, and the Minnesota Wakpa, Minnesota River, come together in central to Dakota, come together is central to Dakota spirituality and history. Badoti is a place that carries a complicated and layered history. In the thousands of years, the Dakota people have been in relationship and kinship with the land here. And in the several hundred years since European settlers colonized the land that the state of Minnesota now occupies. The United States land seizures were a project of spiritual destruction that denied the Dakota free and unhindered access to the land that fundamentally shapes their identity and spirituality. Today, 11 reservations are located within the state of Minnesota, 4 Dakota communities in the southern part of the state, and 7 Ojibwe communities in the north. WAM pays tribute to the Dakota and Ojibwe. We invite you to consider the land in which you live and the confluence of legacies that bring you to stand where you are, particularly through critical reflection and conversation with your own community. So we will begin our program. First, I'll just tell you quickly about very quickly about WAM. WAM is 40 years old today. What about that? 40. Woo! Yeah. 40 years. During our early years in the 80s, we were involved in the movement to stop US support for the murderous regimes in Central America and to end US support of the Contras, who were waging a war against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, which was actually a popular government, put people first. With growing, and then stuff there was peace settlements, sort of, but things did settle down some in Latin America, and of course, things started to happen in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and now, of course, the proxy war with Russia. So, but with growing attention once again on Latin America, which is in big motion both to the left and the right, this is, of course, not lost on the US administrations, whether Democrats or Republicans, who will go to any length to keep those countries in our backyard which are in our backyard after all, right, in line with US economic interests. So WAM's attention and involvement turned that way again. Just before the pandemic, we organized SCOTA, Solidarity, our first action was to reinstate and carry on the popular and important coffee hours held back in the 80s by the Resource Center of the Americas. These were very important to helping to organize the movement against U.S. imperialism in Latin America by giving a lot of information and getting people involved. And we aim to do the same. This morning, we're really pleased and honored to have with us Cassia Lam and Tom Burke to talk about the outrageous case of Alex Saab, a Venezuelan diplomat who is at this moment in jail in Miami on bogus but all too familiar charges. Tom Burke is a labor and anti-war activist. He's the Freedom Road Socialist Organization organizational secretary, and he recently returned from the 5th Congress of the PSUV, which is the United Socialist Party of Venezuela's Congress. Cassia is a public school teacher in South Florida and longtime activist in the Florida anti-war movement. She co-founded the University of Florida chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine in 2009 and was a lead organizer with University of Florida, of course. We're used to U of M. Students for a Democratic Society, which organized against racial violence and discrimination on campus. She co-founded the South Florida anti-war group People's Opposition to War, Imperialism, and Racism, which the acronym is POWER, in 2012, which has been organizing against US-led and US-funded aggression throughout the world, including Palestine, Syria, Iran, and Venezuela, as well as the annual march to close Guantanamo Bay at the gates of the US Summer Command. Miami is obviously in the center of so much. Cassia has served on the UNAC, which is the United National Anti-War Coalition Administrative Committee for 6 years. So thanks so much to Cassia and Tom for being with us today. And we will I'll start with questions. What I did not tell you, I guess, is I did tell you, you can put your questions in, but we'll do some questions and then we'll monitor yours and as they come up, as the timing is right, we'll ask those questions too. So the obvious first question is, who is Alex Saab and what happened to him? Cassie, if you want to start that?
Sure. Yeah, so I don't know if you all would like me to just take some questions in this way, or if you'd want a more elaborate answer to that question, because I can do one or the other. I actually have like a really short presentation on Alex Saab. Would you like me to?
That's perfect. That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and just take this time to share my screen. And thank you so much to everybody for putting this together, by the way. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you all. You all inspire me to do the best anti-war work I can do in South Florida. So thank you for having me. Okay, so as my friend Sarah said, yes, so my name is Cassia Laham, and I am down here in South Florida. And, you know, I was asked to speak about Alex Saab, the case of Alex Saab. So, but before I get into who Alex Saab is, I wanted to just a really brief overview of US imperialist attempts to sort of destroy the Bolivarian Republic, but all of which have failed. I think my friend Tom will be able to go into much greater detail of the current situation in Venezuela. I'm just going to go through some quick rundowns before I get to Saab. So, you know, just as far as recent history, you know, in 98, Hugo Chavez wins the presidency. 99 takes the, you know, is seated as the president of Venezuela. As almost as soon as he took the presidency, the United States was keen on trying to remove him from power. There were multiple attempts at, you know, assassinations and coups. 2002 being perhaps the most infamous case, when the CIA endorsed a coup to try and oust Chavez, which lasted just about 48 hours before the people of Venezuela got him out. So under Chavez's leadership, and the same will go for Nicolas Maduro, who is the current president of Venezuela, we saw poverty rates plummet. We saw literacy rates go way up, malnutrition from hunger go way down, nearly eliminated, and land that was previously sort of hoarded by the wealthy classes being redistributed, hundreds of communes and homes being built for those who previously did not have places to live. So we saw huge changes in the economy and society of Venezuela. Again, Tom will be able to go into greater detail on that when he gives his presentation. In 2013, Chavez died and Nicolas Maduro assumed the presidency. He was elected as the Constitution called for within 30 days. And he continued these processes of land distribution, food distribution programs, housing and utility being seen as a right and not a privilege for the few, which was the case for so many years in Venezuela before Chavez. The inclusion of gender equality laws, and just in general, a progressive socialist agenda to try and uplift the people of Venezuela. Those of us who are involved in anti-war organizing probably know this already, but whenever such transitions and revolutions take place, the United States is quick to try and act on these things because it serves as a threat to US imperialism, to the United States' ability to extract the resources of Venezuela, to utilize the land of Venezuela for their own benefit. Just from 2017 onward, again, I referenced that ever since Chavez took office in 98, that there were attempts to undo the Bolivarian revolution and the sort of socialist cause in Venezuela. But just in recent history, we saw under the Trump administration a much bolder sort of in-your-face attempts to remove Maduro. It became an actual policy of the United States. It wasn't a secret. It was out in the open. In 2017, Trump officials met with various reactionary political leaders and sort of trained military folks to try and plan a coup in Venezuela. Within a few months, the United States recognized the loser of the 2018 Venezuelan election, Juan Guaido, and tried to get other countries of the world to do the same. They thought that they would be able to get popular support within Venezuela for this random politician, Juan Guaido. It did not work. In 2018, we saw a drone attack on Maduro at a military parade. And the people who conducted this drone attack were people trained in Colombia, which is really a training and landing ground for the US military in South America. The drone and the weapons that the drone was armed with, bought in the United States. In April of 2019, Juan Guaido sort of laughably decided to call himself president. And I think most of us who are involved in anti-war organizing, when we saw this, it was almost heartwarming to see this guy call himself president and the people of Venezuela just reject it. Just a very, very big loss for the reactionary forces, both in Venezuela and in the United States, who were hoping that Guaido just going on TV and calling on people to rise up against Maduro would work. And of course, it did not. In 2020, the United States lodges these really absurd, outlandish charges against Nicolas Maduro, offering $15 million for any info leading to his arrest and capture. And I say all of this, and I have on here as well the 2020 infamous, again, almost laughable. And I say almost laughable because this is actually like, these are people's lives that are they're trying to upset. But I say, laughable because, there was just no traction for this 2020 coup, just like there wasn't in 2018. And, you had like this wannabe Rambo guy, Jordan Goudreau, along with others in this sort of army for hire mercenary group, trying to go in again from Colombia And this is a trend that we're going to see, which again is a stronghold for the United States military. So going in from Colombia to Venezuela to try and sort of cause a Bay of Pigs-like uprising in Venezuela. Um, and again, these guys were captured by the people of Venezuela themselves, arrested and detained, and that was a huge failure again. And I bring all of this up because these are all various attempts. You know, these aren't isolated incidents, and these aren't just random attacks by random people. These are things that are very much sort of part of the U.S. imperial agenda. Here you can see some of the faces of of these guys. Sadly, over here on the left is Marco Rubio. That's unfortunately the senator of my state, and he has been the architect of many, many reactionary policies towards Latin America, Cuba in particular, Venezuela as well, and other countries in Central and Latin America too. And he's dead set on trying to get Maduro removed. Juan Guaido, you can see the loser up there in the top corner, and the guy that he tried to get to conduct a coup in 2020, Goudreau, right at the bottom, sitting in front of his Silver Corps mercenary group. These guys and more have failed to minds of the Venezuelan people that indeed they support the Bolivarian Revolution. That's despite sanctions as well. Since 2015, we've seen multiple illegal unilateral sanctions on Venezuela. And, you know, despite the fact, and again, Tom will be able to talk a lot more about this in greater detail, but these sanctions, despite, you know, upsetting the initial sort of economics of Venezuela, have failed to actually derail it. And Venezuela, since 2015, has been able to find ways around these sanctions to try and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, like reroute, all right, their economic trade policies. And continue to sort of bolster their economy in various ways, despite these illegal sanctions that the United States hoped would create such a dire economic situation that the people of Venezuela would become so upset that they would, you know, stand up and overthrow their own government. And again, these are things that we've seen, like this is classic US imperialism playbook. We've seen the attempt on this. I mean, sanctions right now against various countries that you can see highlighted on this slide. And you can't really, as I was saying before, you can't really disconnect sanctions from the case of Alex Saab, because Alex Saab in many ways was kidnapped. Okay, so the sanctions and Alex Saab are very much connected. Saab was appointed special envoy as a Venezuelan diplomat by the government of Venezuela, by Nicolas Maduro. And on his way, like en route from Caracas, Venezuela to Tehran, which again, he was traveling to Iran in order to procure resources for Venezuela as a way around the illegal US sanctions. And on his way to Iran, his plane is forced to land in sort of the West African island nation of Cabo Verde. And he's detained on behalf of the United States by the government of Cabo Verde. And he's going to be detained for 1.5 years in that country, where he was psychologically tortured. He was denied any medical attention as he suffers from cancer. Okay, so I've stopped sharing my screen, so I'll just go on verbally. So the extradition to the United States would happen on October 16th, 2021. And Saab's lawyers immediately, so they took the trial to appeals in just a week ago. Saab's diplomatic staff. That's not to say that they denied him as a diplomat, right? But they did not make a decision on sort of dismissing this case altogether due to his diplomatic immunity. So they're leaving it to a district court, which is the lower level U.S. Federal court. There he will sort of go to trial, face the bogus charges against him by the United States. And during that trial, his lawyer will have to convince that federal district court of his diplomatic status and see if he will sort of dismiss the charges from the get-go. And if not, then it will have to be appealed to the circuit court again. So that's currently where we are at with the Alex Saab case. So he's a diplomat without diplomatic immunity right now. It's absolutely wild. And it spits in the face of international law. It spits in the face of US law. And right now we just have a district court judge, and that's Robert Scola, who is going to be hearing the quote criminal case against Alex Saab. And from there, we'll have to determine his diplomatic immunity. And this is really an incredible thing because this isn't a niche issue, right? This isn't something that just a few progressive people in the United States care about. This is an international issue. And ever since Alex Saab was detained in Cabo Verde, there were protests throughout the island of Cabo Verde. Like the people of Cabo Verde were pissed off at their government for taking illegal action at the behest of the United States. It is notable that Cabo Verde does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. So that extradition in and of itself was illegal. The capture of Saab was illegal as a diplomat. And the fact that the United States tried to haphazardly put together this Interpol, which is like the international police, this Interpol red notice requesting Saab's arrest, that was done the day after he was arrested. So they did this in an ex post facto way, right? Like they arrested him first and then put the red notice out to cover their behinds to say, well, we had this red notice. So the entire situation has just been entirely egregious when it comes to international law, when it comes to respecting the rights and sovereignty of Venezuela. And you've had the United Nations come out against this extradition and against his arrest, because this threatens the status of diplomats throughout the world. This is dangerous territory that the United States is wading through. You've had the Economic Community of West African States, their Court of Justice officially ruled that Saab should be freed because his detention was illegal. You've had the African Bar Association issue a statement demanding his immediate and unconditional release. So this is not just a small issue where a few of us who pay attention to stuff in Venezuela and the United States are active. This is an international issue. Governments and organizations and peoples throughout Africa are demanding his release. Organizations, even through the United Nations, which, definitely has its issues, but even to that extent, you have the UN demanding his release, and you have people throughout the world, Canada, South America, Europe, various places taking part in this Free Alex Saab campaign. So, again, I sort of started with the coup attempts, and then the sanctions, and then Alex Saab. And this is sort of a three-pronged strategy to try and derail the Venezuelan government and the progress that it's made. This is all different strategies with the same end goal. And that end goal is the exploitation of Venezuela's oil, natural gas, precious minerals, gold, and all the various things that Venezuela has, which right now the government is trying to utilize to uplift its people. US imperialism wants to use it to uplift JP Morgan and the various banks in the United States. So it's really important that we see the illegal capture and arrest of Alex Saab as part of this strategy of US imperialism. It's important that we continue to stay active in his case. The Free Alex Saab Committee is active in states and countries. I encourage people to get involved. And we know, as anti-war, anti-imperialist activists gathered here, we know that the best way to resist imperialism is through international solidarity and showing our support for those peoples and countries resisting US imperialism. So I'm here in Miami. I encourage folks, the next date for Saab's trial has not been announced yet, but when it is, we are encouraging people to come down, and we will raise funds to try and get folks flown down here to Miami if possible, to show support outside the federal courthouse and the federal prison where Saab is being held here in Miami. We've held several rallies so far since his original arrest and detention, and we're going to continue to do so. And I encourage folks on June 12th. June 12th will mark like the 2-year anniversary from his detention in Cabo Verde. So in your own city, find a federal courthouse and, do a sign waving, perhaps maybe do an online event for a petition to get his release. But June 12th would be a nice date. That's what folks in the Free Alex Saab Committee are looking at for folks to organize in their own cities. So, yeah, I think that sort of covers all the points that I wanted to cover when it comes to Alex Saab. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it there, and I'll leave the rest. If there's any questions, I'll leave those to fill in the gaps.
Thank you so much, Cassia, for that incredible comprehensive history of, in a nutshell, kind of Venezuela and U.S. imperial or U.S. attacks and aggression against that country, and for describing the Alex Saab and the urgency and the importance of that, and how and what a huge thing it is. And Tom, you've just recently been to Venezuela. Can you give us an update on kind of what the sanctions are, the effect they're having now, and the ways, and both of you can answer this as you want, but how they, if they do continue to make gains, and just, I guess, the overall general condition of Venezuela at this point, including the continued popularity toward the government and their socialist project.
Well, thank you, Sarah Martin, for inviting me, and thank you to WHAM for hosting this, and to Kim DeFranco for doing the tech work there. Yeah, I was just in Venezuela a month ago, and I attended the 5th Congress of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the PSUV. As many of you probably know, it's 22 years of the Bolivarian Revolution, which is, can be described different ways. I tend to call it a national democratic revolution that's attempting to establish a socialist system, but neither Nicolas Maduro, the president, or anyone else I talk to argues that they have socialism yet. They still have a capitalist class, which some of those capitalists are, pro-Venezuela and want a Venezuela that's independent and, benefits their own people, but they still have billionaires and multimillionaires who would like to reverse the revolution and work every day to do exactly that. And they use violence against the government, against the unions, against peasant organizers. There's a conflict, an armed conflict on the border with Colombia that's ongoing, and it's quite complicated with different forces. So the revolution is by no means secure, but in these situations, if you don't continue to move towards socialism, like we saw in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, things will revert back to capitalism, back to, lots of poverty and eventually wars, as we've seen in Eastern Europe. So their plan is to have the PSUV be the vanguard of the revolution and lead things forward towards socialism. And that's the Congress I attended. They had 3 themes. One was resistance to US empire, rebirth, meaning rejuvenation, or, making the internal workings of the party and its ties to the masses of people stronger. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the third element was to continue the revolution towards socialism. So the need to build both state and nationalized industries, but also, communes and cooperatives and other forms of economy that we don't see too much in the US inside imperialist countries, but different forms of economic relations that are pro-people and not just to the benefit of the wealthiest few. So when I was at the Congress, I was there for 5 days. I was honored to be the only gringo, the only person from the U.S. who attended. But there were people, 100 international observers from about 80 countries, and all of Latin America and the Caribbean, but also, Turkey and India and, other countries. So I was honored to be there with them. The party is changing, and it's changing rapidly. So half of the delegates at this Congress, I would say there's about 4,000 delegates, more than half were women, and nearly half were under the age of 30. So you now have party members. Nicolas Maduro called on two 15-year-olds to rise and speak during the Congress. And their whole life has been under the Bolivarian Revolution, and for their parents and them, this is like a life-changing process that they've gone through for the reasons that Cassia was listing. When Chavez was first elected, 80% of food was imported into Venezuela. Today, they're over 85% self-reliant, and in the next few years, they plan to start exporting food. Most of the European banks are saying that Venezuela will grow by 7% this year, because the last 2 years under COVID hurt their economy. But there's going to be a surge of economic activity, and some are even predicting as much as 20% growth. So it'll be a dramatic change for the country. Another big change in their country is there's over 3.5 million new apartments and houses. And it's a country of 30 million people. So if you do the math, you can see that it's, quite a change from kind of the shanty town living, where you have corrugated iron roofs, and if you're lucky, cinder blocks that you've built your huts out of, and you're running electricity that you've stolen off a grid. These apartments come with washers and dryers. They come with stoves. They come with air conditioners. I've seen them myself with Tracy Mohm. She and I walked up and looked at some of them when we were there in Venezuela. So big changes in terms of housing for millions of people. Another fun fact is there's a space agency in Venezuela. I was kind of surprised by that. We visited that. So China launches their satellites into space for them using the Long March rockets. And those satellites provide all the cell phone service and other high-tech stuff. And they're also important for military defense against US invasion. Speaking of which, on the news this week, there's a former Trump, the cabinet official who was responsible for the military. He's saying that they discussed invading Venezuela. That was one of Trump's cabinet proposals, and he helped to defeat it. And I'll just say this, he's a wise man, because the Venezuelan military is at the core of this revolution. Any state, whether it's capitalist or socialist, it's the armed forces and the people's defense of their system, which makes it run. So besides the armed forces that Chavez arose out of, and that there's many revolutionaries who are in charge of it, they also have a people's militia, which is every photos of Sarah Martin with some people 2 weeks ago. I was looking on my laptop. You took photos with the women of the militias, and they're all ages, and they're people like us. And it's a practical question. When the coup d'etat against Maduro was attempted, we woke up and heard some of that. We were there. Tracy Mohm can tell you that. And we went and saw where it happened. And we also went downtown where the presidential palace is, to stand with about 30,000 people in defense of Maduro. But the workers we visited the next day at the National Electric System, it's called Corpo Elect. They're responsible for the whole electricity grid in the country. They told us that some reactionaries came to the highway overpasses that overlook their yard and their buildings and started shooting with rifles at the workers there. But the militias organized in workplaces and communities So they went to their lockers and got their rifles out and started shooting back at these reactionaries, and that made them run away. So this is not just about elections, and it's not just about, kind of what you hear in the New York Times. This is a struggle that's ongoing, and there's still a ruling, capitalist body that wants to take away the revolution, And when I say ruling, what I really mean is they own most of the means of production. They own most of the economy. It's still in their hands. All right, I'll move on. Another fun fact that I bet you don't know about Venezuela is there's 4 to 6 million Colombians who live there. There's a whole neighborhood called Petare to the east of Caracas, which is half a million Colombians living there. So 30 million Venezuelans, 4 to 6 million Colombians. How come we never hear about that? Many of the Colombians were happy to come to Venezuela to start farming and transform the agricultural base of the country. And finally, my last point is it's a diverse country, and most people have a strong identity as Venezuelans, and they see Colombian people, for instance, as their brothers and sisters and kinfolk because of the history of the Bolivarian Revolution and Bolivar himself in the region. And maybe it's because I'm Irish American, but I give a lot of weight to that history. And that's one of the reasons Venezuela is having the revolution, is because Bolivar was based in that country and had been able to spread the liberation movement from Spain to the others. But today you have the same politics where the masses of people in those countries want to be free from US domination, especially in Colombia, but also Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Panama. The US dominates all of them economically, militarily, and politically. And people want to be liberated, So with with the weight of history on them, though, Venezuela is interesting because it was the most industrial developed country in Latin America. And the working class was in the 6 terms of incomes and quality of life. But what reversed? What reversed is the US dominated it more and more, and the capitalists who were tied to the US wouldn't advocate or plan for other economic growth and development. And so people became impoverished, where 47% were either part-time or unemployed. And it created the conditions for people to rise up because they knew they could have a different and a better life. And that's what I saw when I went to this Congress, was there's a whole new generation of people, and they're ready to take the reins of power with government of, by, and for the people. But the class content of it is strongly pro-worker, pro-peasant, pro-farmer, and trying to, put the power in the hands of regular people. So the PSUV is a party that has 8 million people registered as a party. And their voter turnout, they've won 25 of 27 elections. It might be 26 of 28 by now, but they've won again and again and again. And the worst election turnout, for instance, had a higher voter turnout than when the US tries to, say that the one and only president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is not legitimate. They're just talking garbage. They recognize all kinds of governments and leaders who are not elected with such popular support in their countries. And some of them aren't elected at all. But Venezuela is a protagonistic democracy, meaning it's a participatory democracy. But the PSUV wants people to do more than just vote. They want them to be active in social lives and sports and culture and organize themselves. So when there was a food crisis caused by the billionaire owners of this grocery stores and hoarding and selling off to other countries, the military quickly acted to seize and set up a food distribution program. Well, that got handed off shortly after to militants of the PSUV, and they organized themselves into a new formation to do the CLAP food distribution with state support. But it's not a state-run program anymore. it's almost like what we would call a nonprofit program on a national level. So that's another new form of economics. There's a new wave of grocery stores being built across the country that are state run and operated, by local groups. So you have metallurgy, aluminum industry that's brand new. That's state run with state investments. We visited on our last trip with the Teamsters when COVID hit. We came home on March 13th, I think. We had to, the airports were shut, so they put us on an airplane with all the Cuban medical personnel. And that's how we got back to Florida, which was not our plan, but we got home. But we visited a printing factory that the workers took over because the Argentinian owners abandoned it. So you had 600 workers running a printing factory. They now print all the books and notebooks and maps for Venezuelan students in grammar schools. And they run it themselves. There's state oversight. So there's, accountants and others who come in to make sure the books are good and they're following proper procedures. We visited a post office where, because their old postal trucks are breaking down, they've had to import a lot of new trucks from China. So the Teamsters, who have a similar job at UPS, were asking, well, what do you do when you can't get parts for the American-made trucks? They said, well, we just take a brand new Chinese one, And so they have too many trucks that they have so much supplies that they're sitting with trucks on the lot. So I would hardly call that a society in crisis. They're just replacing whatever the US uses sanctions to get rid of. They're just replacing it with either the support of China, Vietnam, Turkey, Iran, Belarus. Other countries are helping them, Cuba in the biggest way. They just replace everything that they need. There's a few shortages like medicines for diabetes, which have caused problems. But again, they have opened brand new hospitals. They opened COVID clinics when that hit. So they claim to have 101% vaccination rates. That's what they announced every day at the 5th Congress. And everybody wears masks when they're in public. Even out on the street, 90% of people outside are still wearing their masks because they want to take care of each other and show solidarity with each other. And they have one of the lowest death rates in the world for the COVID crisis. So everything there is about the people. It's about public health. It's about public education. They've opened 13 new universities. So most families now can send someone to a university, which was not possible ever before in the history of the country. Children go all the way through high school now. If you look at a country like Colombia, most people do not graduate from high school. It's all private schools, and there's little funding for public education. And in Colombia, the most dangerous job you could have if you're a trade unionist is a school teacher. That's who they kill the most, Every 2 weeks in Colombia, they're killing trade unionists. Anyway, I'll talk about next about the resistance again of their theme of their Congress was to the US empire. And they talked about having a civilian military alliance at the core of their party. And the people's militias are trained by the military, but have an independent character too. And my advice would be that the US and Colombia don't try to find out if they can invade Venezuela. If the Taliban could defeat them in Afghanistan, I guarantee you the women in Venezuela are going to treat the US soldiers a lot worse, a lot worse. All right. Evo Morales from Bolivia attended, Rafael Correa from Ecuador attended. They gave great speeches. The Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, she talked about the plan to organize the party, that a 1x10 plan, that each cadre is responsible to go organize 10 people, not just to vote anymore, but to participate in community groups, in their unions and student organizations, and get out there and organize the people to move towards socialism. That's the goal, that the working class needs to emerge and take control of the economy and society. There was a strong anti-corruption theme because a mayor in one of the cities, a PSUV mayor, was caught with a military official dealing narco trafficking with a Colombian cartel. So that came up again and again. They talked about prosecuting it, that they're going on federal anti-drug charges. They're going to go to prison, and it's a changed country in terms of, the cartels and the gangs are on their way out. There's still a struggle that has to take place against that and will be ongoing. But it's not just about rules and laws in their country, and they spoke about that. They have to change people's attitudes and the whole culture. You can't just ban it and hope it goes away. You have to use a combination of factors and forces alongside the law enforcement. They also want the students and the young people who attend universities. These are Bolivarian universities begun by Chavez. They want them to serve the people, and they want them to go to the working class and organize them with the new skills they learned through their education. So that was a big theme. Finally, I already talked about it, but the revolution means moving away from the oil-reliant society they've had. They have a lot of minerals. They have a lot of gold, so they've gotten rid of the cowboy gold mining, and they've created a new industry around that. So they have a lot of natural resources that they can benefit from. And now that they're in the hands of revolutionaries and the hands of the people, they've been able to transform things quickly, but they still have to develop these new economic forms. So I've said it 5 times, and I'll try to skip over that now. It seems every time we go there, if you go with me, something dramatic happens. So there was the coup d'etat. The one morning we woke up early and we heard it actually happening. When I took the Teamsters there, they met us at the airport with extra security for our safety, because the night before, the opposition burned down the warehouse where the computers and the voting machines are kept. And those voting machines came from Ohio, from a Republican who produces those in Ohio. So every time they said, oh, they have these voting machines that aren't reliant and yada, yada, they would say, well, they're your voting machines, they're from Ohio. So we met with the head of the Electoral Council, which is a 4th arm of the government. We have the 3, legislative, executive, and judicial. And they have a 4th one, which was an idea of Bolivar's back in the 1820s, which is the Electoral Council, which oversees the process to keep the big money out of the elections and make it fair for everyone to participate and compete. So we went to meet with the woman who was the head of that within hours of arriving. And within less than 12 hours of this warehouse burning down, she said, I want to tell the solidarity activists from the US what we're going to do. So she said they were already talking to China about purchasing new machines and new computers, and they ran an election within months after that. So everything the US tries to do, they come back at it, they come back hard, and they're overcoming and winning. Again, the economy, they're trying to make it public, collective, communal, and state instead of private. And they get a lot of solidarity from Belarus, Turkey, India, China, Vietnam. I saw a lot of workplaces with signs from Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh. His face is on a lot of things. Cuba is number 1 in terms of helping with medical and sports personnel and education. And then Iran as well. Iran has helped them overcome the US sanctions against their oil industry. So they're back to producing at levels they did 10 years ago. They hit their lowest and now they're back up again. So even by the week I was there, the days I was there is when Biden sent his delegation to see if they could get airplane and other fuel from Venezuela because of the US and NATO provoked war in the Ukraine. So that didn't work out for Biden. And I'll tell you something else that's not working out too good for Biden right now. The Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. It's not going good if you're President Biden. This is something Clinton set up, and then Obama invited Rafael Castro. Did I get his name right? Raul Castro to attend it. So that was the one time where all of the Americas was in attendance. But Blinken and Biden, the fools that they are, they said, oh, we're not going to invite Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. So all of the Caribbean countries said, well, we're not going to attend because it's not really the Americas then. And then the president of Mexico said on a state visit to Cuba, he was considering canceling, and he had called Biden to tell him, you have to invite everyone. It's not the American summit, it's the summit of the Americas. So now you have Argentina saying they're not going to attend. Chamorro in Honduras saying she's not going to go. The president of Bolivia has announced he's not going, and it's collapsing. And Biden will look like a fool if he's the only president standing outside of it in LA. We had already organized and are going to continue with a workers' summit of the Americas, which maybe someone from Minneapolis can go to it. It's going to be June 10th through 12th in Tijuana. I'm hearing that the president of Mexico is going to visit and give us a talk. I started out thinking this would be kind of a small conference, but good to do because people from Canada and the US can get to Tijuana easily and meet Mexican unions and Venezuelans and other people from other countries. But now it's becoming this big thing where they're saying presidents are going to address us either by Zoom or in person instead of going to Los Angeles. So maybe you'll take a look at it June 10th through 12th in Tijuana. One thing I learned about the Venezuelan PSUV is that they have what they call units of battle of Hugo Chavez. And they praise Chavez a lot. The youth would say, Chavez didn't die, he turned himself into millions of us, you know? And so these units of battle, Hugo Chavez, are the basic party units and the basic self-defense unit, both. And that's the basis of organizing. And that's what they want the youth to go build in different parts of society. Sorry, I'm gonna close my door. Where we saw this was in the breakout sessions. There were outdoor sessions where hundreds of people would attend on certain topics or certain sectors, and people would stand and make impassioned speeches, like really fiery and really determined. And then people would vote on proposals, vote them up or vote them down. And sometimes there's laughter, sometimes there's jeering. So that tells me they were real proposals and real debates. And that's how decisions got made at a basic level at the Congress. Finally, I'll say that with going forward, I think you'll see that they're going to continue to have a lot of elections compared to other countries. Maduro or someone else from the PSUV will run for president again. I'm predicting it will be President Maduro. I attended a Zoom meeting about a week or two after the Congress, and I was asked to attend because that's where they elected the president of their party, who's Nicolas Maduro again, through acclamation. It was very popular. And I also got to participate in a breakout session with the head of the Bolivarian trade union movement, Francisco Torrealba, who's often our host and who's the host of the Workers' Summit of the Americas in Tijuana. And I was given the floor to speak to the trade union leaders, again, mostly women and mostly under the age of 30, and express solidarity from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and from our movement in the US. And I got a big round of applause when I said, we know that there's only one president of Venezuela, and that's Nicolas Maduro. So, all right, thank you for letting me talk.
Yes, for that incredible, that's really thrilling to know that Venezuela's gone forward like that in just 2 years, actually. And it's both inspirational and really depressing to think of what's happening in this country. We're going in just the opposite direction in all these areas. And no wonder the US wants to squelch them. They're just such an incredible example, as is Cuba. What?
That's right.
Okay. Anyway,
Are we gonna have questions?
yes, we are. Do we have any questions from on Zoom?
Not right now. I think we can do questions from the.
Okay,
in-person.
Carla, do you want to?
Are you going to answer, or is the
I'm
gentleman?
not going to answer, no.
He is.
Yeah, say it and I might have to.
I
repeat
have
it.
three kind of clarifying questions because I'm kind of new to this, or very new. One would be, what is that protagonist democracy? I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm wondering if there's any kind of coordination with that group internationally. And what Teamsters group is he talking about? The US Teamsters or international? Oh, that's what I'm
Did
wondering.
you hear all those questions?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I've been organizing small delegations, mostly of members of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, to go to Venezuela for a few years now. And we'll plan to go again this year. So if people are interested, we can make it happen. I also helped the international department, or whatever it's called, of the DSA last summer. I helped a guy named Tom from the suburbs of Chicago to, make more contacts with the PSUV. And like Sarah Martin, they got to meet President Nicolas Maduro. I haven't been invited to meet him. So I thought it was funny. I put them in touch and they got to go meet him. But one day, so yeah, the DSA is very much involved in it in this point. And this concept of the protagonist democracy, I think, deserves more investigation and research by us. I had never heard of the term before, but my understanding of it, and I got to speak to the foreign minister to the US about it, Carlos Roan. He explained it well to us. He would say that it's more than, but when Europeans say participatory democracy, they mean big mass parties that turn out, like the Chicago Democratic machine used to do, turn out people to vote, and that's it, But a protagonistic democracy means you're attending either workplace or community or maybe university, school-based meetings and making plans and proposals for what kind of society you want, what kind of culture you want, what should the economy where you live be based on and look like, what kind of things do you need to bring to an end because they're negative in your neighborhood or in your workplace, how do you, in a context of the US, how would you deal with gangs? Are they the enemy or are they a problem of society caused by capitalism? So you would have to debate and discuss these things over time and figure out ways to change society. It could be as simple as, we want to clean up the local park and we're going to apply for a grant from the local government to do that. And that's what they mean by protagonistic democracy. So you don't have to be a PSUV member to participate in that. You could be a right winger who also wants an improved park with a children's playground that has soft landing material instead of concrete or tarmac, right? It's that basic. And so anyone can participate in that kind of democratic process. But to me, that's the best understanding I have of it.
And the last question, I think, had to do with who were the Teamsters you went with?
So they were also members of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, but we specifically wanted to bring people who are members of the Teamsters unions from 4 parts of the country so they could go back and talk to the other Teamsters about their experience and have a message of hope about the future, that there's dramatic changes and an ongoing revolution in this country that gets nothing but bad mouthed in the US press, and meet with the leaders of the unions. We met with the leaders of 6 transportation unions which Maduro is called the workers' president because he was the head of the bus drivers union. And we met the leader of that union too. We met the aviation union, the train workers, the Teamsters, but they just call it the truck drivers union. Subway system. And we held a 2-hour meeting with the leaders of all those unions and Francisco Torrealba, who oversees it. Francisco Torrealba is also a senator in the legislature at the top level. And so they told us what their plans are for the future. And Venezuela couldn't get train parts because of the US boycott or US blockade. So they figured out how to make their own with technology from friendly countries. And now they're producing their own train parts. Here's another oddity is like Colombia or other countries that the US dominates, the only freight train lines that existed ran from points of production, from factories or where raw materials, minerals, and oil and gas are extracted, to the port cities. Because the multinational corporations, Wall Street, all they care about is getting what they want, and to hell with the rest of the country's needs. Well, now they're building freight trains between cities. We saw one being constructed from Caracas out to a city where we visited the printing factory. And China's been of great help doing this, but they actually shut them down for a while because the agreement with China, China wants to train local management as well as workers. So you don't just have Chinese companies coming and doing it all. So there's a transfer of technology, there's a transfer of management programs. It's really interesting, and it's a very different model than what the European Union or the US does in these countries, where it's all for the benefit of their companies. This is helping to build infrastructure and an economic base so Venezuela can be more independent and stand on its own.
Other questions? This is only slightly related, but I know you've had a great interest and involvement in what's going on in Colombia for a long time. Do you have any predictions about the upcoming elections or what's going on there?
It's a moment of great change there. The leading candidate, he's social democrat, and actually came from a movement that was an armed movement of revolutionaries in the past, and they gave up on that back in the 80s. I think it's also a highly dangerous situation for him and for other people of the left. The killings, the FARC went and entered a peace process, and they were the largest armed group. The ELN continues to fight, but the killings have not stopped of the social movements, of the leftists. Trade unions are only 4% of the workforce, and they get killed every 2 weeks still, with teachers being the main target. So the war situation with the FARC certainly came to an end, but the right wing and it's ridiculous. If President Maduro comes to Los Angeles, the US might arrest him claiming he's involved in narco trafficking, right? That's how outrageous this is. Over a third of the elected parliament in Colombia are narco traffickers, and they don't hide it. Over a third of them. The US extradited the former president of Honduras to put him on trial, which we oppose. We don't think the US has the right to put any foreign leaders or any people from the movements in Latin America or anywhere else on trial in this country. Honduras should put the US people on put our narco traffickers and Narco Rubio there in Florida, take him and his brother-in-law who's a narco trafficker and put them on trial in their countries. That would be justice. But that's what's happening this week, is the former president of Honduras and other officials are being extradited and appearing in New York federal courts. But I hope for the best for Colombia. The social movement that arose last summer is powerful and widespread, and it involves many different forces, and it's not just about elections. Again, it's about how do these movements take power and, put an end to the big billionaires and millionaires controlling everything. We face the same question in our country, so we're in solidarity with their movement. And I think the new president in Colombia, if he survives, that's my view. If he survives, you've seen photos of him campaigning. They have metal shields in front of him, right, while he's speaking. I watched a video where people were shooting at his car as it was leaving, putting, bullets into the armored panel and into the protective glass of his vehicle. So they're already trying to kill him. It's not a question of if. But he will reform some things, but will he take a stand against the US the way the president of Mexico does at times? I'm not sure, I just don't know.
Yeah, I want to thank you both again for talking. And I realized I was sitting next to Sarah this whole time and I never introduced myself. I'm Simon. I'm also a member of SCOTA, and I have learned a ton today, and I've been taking as many notes as my little hand can handle. So I had a question for Cassia. So you mentioned the Free Alex Saab committee, and you mentioned some of the statements of support or statements of denunciation of his arrest. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that process of resisting his persecution, and what you all have been doing in Miami or on that committee, and then what groups from areas like Minneapolis can do other than kind of trying to spread the word about the persecution and the important case of Alex Saab.
Yeah, so as far as things that we've been participating in the committee, and I'll either drop things in the chat, or I can send things to you and Sarah to sort of share with folks either on the WAM website or what have you. But aside from, so we've had letters and statements to both the judges and the State Department of the United States. And we've had continuous rallies. So basically, when he was first brought over to, there were rallies and protests and letters to stop the detention of Alex Saab when he was in Cape Verde, right? When he was there for about a year and a half, there were people heavily involved in that campaign, especially through organizations in UNAC. Since his arrival to Miami, since he was kidnapped and brought to federal prison in Miami and is in federal court in Miami, at every sort of trial or hearing juncture, I should say, there have been protests outside of the federal courthouse. And in particular, right now, the Free Alex Saab committee actually has Oscar Rivera Lopez as the chairperson for the committee. And for those of you who don't know, Oscar is the he was a political prisoner in the United States, one of the longest serving political prisoners. He's a, Puerto Rican, liberation activist. And he was in prison for, oh gosh, somebody can probably correct me, I think 30 something years. And he's actually been sort of stationing himself in Miami to help with our protests as well. So he's been sort of speaking to various progressive news media outlets, and even the more reactionary Spanish language media outlets in Miami, which was actually really fun to watch because he would speak talking about the illegal nature of Saab's detention and why it was important for us to be protesting for his release. And these Spanish language networks actually didn't know, they didn't recognize him for who he was. And afterwards, when he explained himself, they were really taken aback because these are like the most reactionary news people you've ever met. So it was really fun to see their face sort of change from like one of interest to one of like, oh my God, who did I just interview? So that was wonderful. So yeah, I mean, it is, we do have like this international hero sort of leading the way for the Free Alex Saab committee. He's the honorary chair of the committee. And so, yeah, we urge people to come down. Now, right now, we don't have a specific date that I'm aware of, and I may have missed it in my own sort of flustered nature of the last couple of weeks because of Ukraine and Venezuela and everything else that's happening. So I don't know if there's any specific date that was set out, but if and when I get one, folks will be sure to know, and we'll more than happily invite people down to Miami to help us with whatever rally. We'll try to get people lodging and flight tickets if necessary. So we encourage folks to come down whenever the hearing date is announced. I don't know, Tom, if you know, did you hear about a date yet?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we have a date just yet. And that's another tactic, by the way, that they do in these trials, is sort of prolonging them and stretching them out, which is probably the reason why the appeals court, the circuit court, refused to sort of make a decision on his diplomatic immunity, because this is a way of just stretching out the case, right? So now it's going to go to the district court. They're going to have to hear the whole case, the criminal case. And then from there, then his lawyers will have to appeal it to the circuit court to deal with whether the case should have even been heard because of his diplomatic immunity. So this is, an intentional tactic for sure by the US government. And I'll say this too, his arrest, we spoke on this issue sort of earlier in the week, and somebody asked, like, why do you think they're going after Alex Saab? And like, there's two reasons that I believe, and that's why it's just as important that we defend him. The first reason is because he's been such a thorn in the side to US imperialism, because he's been very effective at circumventing the sanctions, right? The illegal sanctions that the United States has placed on Venezuela. It's because of Alex Saab and people like him who have been doing their patriotic duty to their country to continue the economic flow of Venezuela, right? That's what pisses off the United States, right? The fact that he's been so effective at his job and really showing the limitations of US imperialism in that way to affect the Venezuelan economy. And the other reason I believe that they went after Saab in particular was to try to get him to flip on Maduro. They wanted him to make up some nonsense bullshit that they've had luck doing in other countries and with other people, right? Where they've been able to sort of charge them with ridiculous charges and say they'll go away if you just say this and that against Nicolas Maduro. And he, immediately wrote a letter saying, like, they're trying to get me to say some shit and I'm not going to. Like, I'm very grateful for the president of my country and I stand firm with him. So, I think these are two reasons why the US went after him, and both have been like abject failures. Nobody's, he didn't flip, and he was capable of circumventing these sanctions, and other people are sort of picking up where he left off in Venezuela. So,
Tom. Did you want to say something? Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's interesting to also think about what was Trump's policy and now what's Biden's policy. And besides the failed trip to get some oil and, airplane fuel out of Venezuela because of the, NATO-caused crisis in Eastern Europe, there's not too much difference, the Summit of the Americas is a sign of the kind of, they're trying to maneuver to say they want to work with other countries and they want to be different than Trump. But then when they actually apply their policy, the, exclusion of Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela shows that they're not different to the rest of the world. So I just want to say it's like, we're in a very different situation than we were, in decades past, where, the US could dictate to a lot of countries, but with China having such an important impact in Latin America through helping to build infrastructure and trade deals, including oil deals with, say, Ecuador. Now you have a situation where countries have choices that they can make, and they don't have to toe the line of Biden and Blinken, especially when that line is no different than Trump's. So it's kind of an exciting time for us. And people in Venezuela and Colombia and other Cuba, they want solidarity from us, and they want to interact with us more, and they're excited when we show up at their conferences and talk, so I want to encourage people to participate in the protest against Alex Saab and take a trip with us, the next time we go.
And go to Tijuana.
Yeah.
Question about that. Do you think that meeting will be people that can't get to Tijuana are going to be able to watch it? Will it be live streamed?
Yeah, they're planning with the Alliance for Global Justice is doing a big part, and International Action Center, and we're participating through the Committee to Stop FBI Repression and raising the case of the Colombian revolutionary Simon Trinidad, who's in prison in Colorado at the Supermax. So there's lots of groups participating, but the AFGJ is going to live stream it, and they're really doing a big part in this.
Actually, that what you said, Simon Trinidad, that's actually a question somebody had at one point, is the parallels between his case and Julian Assange, and are there others that, and Alex Saab, certainly. Circumstances are probably a little different with each one, but there's this list of people who.
Yeah, and the woman from China who was arrested in, I guess, house arrest, but the Canadian government under Trump's guidance, these Canadian liberals will go along with the Trump policy and the Biden policy, as long as it's the empire's policy, So with Simon Trinidad, he was fighting for the liberation of his country in his own country, and the US was interfering and sending, intelligence and, using pilots to reports of the FARC, and got shot down, and they captured these 3 American mercenaries who are all former US military, and that's what they're mad about, is that they got caught doing it. They're not, they're just punishing Simon Trinidad because the FARC beat them at something at one point and was able to capture their mercenaries. And there's no other word for it. I live in the place in Michigan, in Grand Rapids, where Eric Prince is from. He's he's Betsy DeVos's brother, just to be clear. That's who your Secretary of Education was. And these billionaires, they want to run everything here and there. So when there's resistance to it, they're going to punish whoever they can get their hands on. But, Julian Assange, what did he do? He reported US war crimes. How is that a crime?
Yeah.
That's called hero work,
Exactly. Cassia, speaking of places to live, you live in Miami, and you have your hands full with right-wing Cubans and right-wing Venezuelans. How do you
Yeah, we're the global capital for warlords, narco traffickers, right-wing paramilitaries, former presidents fleeing countries in Latin America. We welcome them all with open arms down here. And you can see that in the transitioning, very right-wing politics of South Florida. It used to be that so the 2 bottom counties here in South Florida are Broward County and Miami-Dade, and those used to be like the blue counties in South Florida, right? And they would make Florida a swing state because Florida's the deep South otherwise, those blue counties have become purpler and purpler, and they're becoming red, and they have voted that way really for the last 10 years. And that's really in part to a lot of these more right-wing elements leaving various places, Venezuela, Colombia, areas in Central America as well, the Caribbean. I mean, just all the right-wing elements, and a lot of them hoard their money here and buy up all the property with cash above face value, leaving the rest of us without, like, pricing us out of housing. It's crazy. It's a crazy, wild world down here. But I will say that, you know, despite the reactionary politics of a lot of the people sort of newly arriving, an interesting transition has started to happen. So, for example, when it comes to Cuba, down here, I mean, you guys know, I mean, it was a violent time in the 80s and 90s down here. If you were somebody just calling for like open politics with Cuba, there were actual like right-wing Cuban terrorist cells in Miami setting off bombs in diplomats' homes and offices just for daring to go and meet with the president of Cuba, Fidel Castro. And, you know, so it's been a pretty solidly sort of right-wing Cuban area. But, you know, despite that, you've had smaller groups that have done caravans for the last 2 decades or so against the blockade, against the embargo, the illegal embargo, just like how the United States has the illegal embargo in Venezuela. So you have, you know, this embargo against Cuba that's been going on since 1960. And it's always just been a handful. I mean, I'm 33 and I've lived here my whole life, and it's always just been sort of a handful of people. And in the last like 2 years, we've seen those caravans get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we've seen, and Cuban Americans, right? So Cuban Americans and Cuban immigrants actually joining in these caravans to undo the sanctions and embargoes on Cuba. You've seen the progressive forces get, you know, a little bit more traction in the community. And there's different reasons for that. You know, people see that the sanctions are, you know, not having any effect. First of all, if their desired effect is to undo the Cuban Revolution, that's not happening, you know, but it does keep the people in South Florida from going and visiting their family in Cuba. It does stop them from going and, like, you know, bringing them whatever gifts and vice versa, you know. So the sort of personal impact it's having on people here perhaps is leading to bigger numbers in these anti-sanction, anti-embargo caravans, but it's a positive step. And we saw that as well. When did we have this event? It must have been last summer. We had a huge Colombia rally after, you know, the protesters in Colombia were being, you know, gunned down basically by the Colombian government. And we had, I think it was about 200 people in Miami, Colombians largely, along with some anti-war folks, but largely Colombians, meeting outside the Torch of Friendship in Biscayne Bay, which is right off the water, demanding an end to the violence against protesters. Now, that might seem like a really low bar for those of us who are used to bigger numbers, but to get 150 to 200 Colombians in Miami to end the right-wing violence against peaceful protesters is actually a really big deal, because this is the same place where we had like large rallies in support of the like very right-wing president who was on trial for like corruption and narco trafficking. So yeah, I think, you know, despite the fact that we are a hub of right-wing, reactionary, dangerous people who come and seek refuge in South Florida and attack us for our politics, by the way, like, sorry, I feel like I'm going on tangents, but, you know, we work with an organization called the Alianza Martiana, which is, you know, largely a Cuban American organization. They've been working against the sanctions for decades. And the place where we meet, where the Alianza meets, was graffitied and like firebombed just a year and a half ago. So we had to stop meeting there, and they've stopped meeting publicly. So that's not to say, right, that it's not without danger, and that, you know, the majority of folks down here are more reactionary than not. But I do think it's important to see that the progressive forces are not backing down, and that, in fact, we are growing in numbers. And that's pretty impressive if you know the history of South Florida. And I'll end it by saying this, sorry for keeping for continuing to talk. I'll end it by saying this, which is there are actually some politicians who are now starting to listen to these progressive movements like ours. And just last week, 18 progressive Democrats in Congress signed a letter to Joe Biden telling him to remove the sanctions on Venezuela. You know, and it's a small step, but I think it's important. I think it tells you the weight that our movements can have, you know, on local and national politics. So I'll sort of end it there.
Yeah, and our Congresswoman person, Ilhan Omar, actually was one of the 18 that signed it. So
That's right. That's right. I forgot she was your congressperson. That's absolutely right. Mhm.
many of us. So, are there any other questions? I think not. And so on that positive note of things shifting in South Florida, and certainly the huge shift in Venezuela is, I think we will say goodbye to you and thank you so much. And we'll see you in Miami and Tijuana, right?
That's right. Solidarity.
Yes, you will.
Yes.
Solidarity, everybody. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.